What if I told you that there is a 50-year-old model that says we're not heading toward a recession, but toward a complete systemic collapse? In 1972, a groundbreaking report by MIT researchers projected that modern civilization could face collapse by the year 2040. Decades later, a follow-up analysis from KPMG suggests we may be advancing toward that outcome even faster than originally expected. For roughly 10,000 years, human civilizations have emerged, flourished, and ultimately faded, leaving behind only ruins and relics of their former glory. Historians struggle to identify a single cause for these downfalls, yet most tend to stem from four recurring factors: political instability, cultural and societal fractures, environmental degradation, and, most notably for our focus today, economic breakdown. Civilizations throughout history have crumbled under the weight of one or more of these forces. Some met a swift end, like Pompeii, lost in a matter of hours to a volcanic eruption. Others unraveled over weeks or months, such as the Aztec Empire's fall after 93 days of resistance. And some, like Rome, took centuries to decay. Today's global civilization is the most advanced and prosperous the world has ever seen, outpacing every empire before it by orders of magnitude. The fact that you're watching this content right now means you have access to something ancient kings and scholars could never have imagined: the internet. And with it comes a wealth of other modern luxuries: climate control, global travel, effective healthcare, and more, that we often take entirely for granted. Modern civilization offers conveniences that previous generations could scarcely imagine: instant global communication, reliable access to safe food and clean water, and the ability to stream music on demand. These comforts, once unthinkable, are now part of everyday life for much of the world. When asked who holds the title of the richest individual in history, many might point to Elon Musk, recently valued at over $270 billion. But others often invoke historical figures like Rockefeller, the Rothschilds, the Romanovs, or even Mansa Musa. While these names loom large in the history of wealth, their fortunes existed within a world defined by widespread poverty. Despite their riches, they lived without electricity, plumbing, refrigeration, or medical care that modern society now considers basic. By comparison, a modest apartment today offers more comfort, security, and health standards than palaces of centuries past. What's more, we are living through one of the most peaceful eras in human history. Though the news cycle might suggest otherwise, large-scale wars and violent conflicts have declined dramatically. Much of this stability is owed to advances in technology, education, and interdependence among nations. Even countries with simmering tensions are bound together by trade and mutual economic interest, more so than the strongest alliances in the time of Napoleon. Economic cooperation has replaced many incentives for conflict. Though fragile, this global structure has delivered unprecedented prosperity. Comparing today's interconnected economy to the empires of the past is like comparing a jet engine to a donkey, not as an exaggeration, but as a reflection of the sheer magnitude of progress. Our extraordinary advancement over past civilizations is undeniable, but therein lies a hidden vulnerability. Like a jet engine compared to a donkey, today's global systems are exponentially more powerful, yet significantly less resilient. A minor failure in a tightly interconnected network, economic, technological, or environmental, can lead to cascading consequences. The complexity that makes our world efficient also makes it fragile. And in a society where basic necessities are often just a tap away, many would struggle to cope without instant access to food, water, or energy. This growing fragility is precisely what prompted researchers at MIT to investigate whether modern civilization is on a sustainable path. Their landmark study, The Limits to Growth, aimed to answer a critical question: could our consumption of global resources continue indefinitely without triggering collapse? The answer, according to their analysis, was no. Published in 1972, this was one of the first economic studies to use computer modeling, specifically a method known as system dynamics. In essence, system dynamics is a way of simulating real-world systems by representing their components and interactions within a digital model. Although the technology at the time was rudimentary by today's standards, the insights it produced were remarkably forward-looking. While the concept of system modeling may seem commonplace today, it was revolutionary in the 1960s and 70s. At a time when computers had minimal processing power and occupied entire rooms, the team at MIT managed to build an ambitious simulation known as World 3, a computerized model designed to represent the global economy. Despite technological constraints, this software mapped a wide range of interconnected systems, from population growth and industrial output to resource consumption and environmental impact. One of its key insights was how these variables influence one another. For example, an expanding population increases demand for food, water, housing, and energy, but it can also accelerate innovation. With more people, the likelihood of discovering transformative minds like Tesla, Da Vinci, or Haber increases. However, modeling such a dynamic system is far from simple. Economists often use simplified assumptions like ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, to isolate specific effects. While helpful in theory, the real world rarely operates under such static conditions. A change in one economic factor typically sets off a chain reaction, influencing multiple other outcomes. Predicting the future under these conditions is extraordinarily difficult without accounting for how variables continuously affect one another. This is precisely what World 3 set out to capture. The program included algorithms to simulate everything from birth rates to agricultural technology. Its goal was to explore how these factors, though individually manageable, could combine in ways that amplify their effects, creating feedback loops that destabilize systems over time. In complex systems, small changes can reinforce themselves over time, creating what economists refer to as feedback loops. One striking example is the relationship between declining birth rates and the aging population. As birth rates fall, the average age of the population rises. An older population places increased financial and social pressure on younger generations either through direct caregiving or through taxation to support pension systems and elder care infrastructure. In turn, this burden reduces the economic and personal incentives for younger individuals to start families of their own, accelerating the decline in birth rates. This type of self-reinforcing dynamic is central to the findings of the MIT study. Although the researchers considered hundreds of variables in their computer simulation of the global economy, they focused their analysis on 5 critical indicators: population, industrial output, food production, available natural resources, and pollution. These factors, and the way they influence one another over time, formed the core of their long-term projection models. It's important to remember that this report was published back in 1972, long before climate change became a mainstream scientific and political concern. Had the study been conducted today, it would likely have included metrics such as global average temperatures. Nevertheless, the 5 core variables, population, industrial output, food production, natural resources, and pollution, remain deeply relevant to how modern societies function. What's even more critical than each variable in isolation is how they interact dynamically over time. To illustrate this, imagine isolating food supply and population while holding all other factors constant. A drop in population may eventually lead to reduced food demand and thus lower food production. But reverse that scenario, a collapse in food production would directly endanger population stability. Clearly, the direction of causality matters. Rather than make a single definitive forecast, the MIT researchers acknowledged the complexity of predicting the future. A breakthrough, such as the invention of a commercially viable fusion reactor, could render many concerns obsolete overnight. To account for such possibilities, they ran multiple simulations under different assumptions, altering initial conditions such as the pace of technological progress and improvements in worker productivity. This approach allowed them to explore a range of plausible outcomes rather than commit to a single trajectory. Some scenarios modeled a future where technological innovation accelerated exponentially. In these projections, humanity would achieve breakthroughs like mining asteroids or producing lab-grown food at scale, solutions that would dramatically ease pressure on Earth's limited resources. In contrast, other simulations assumed that technological progress would gradually plateau. While this might seem unlikely to those of us raised in an era of constant innovation, it's not far-fetched. Moore's law, where computing power doubled approximately every 2 years, has held for decades, but physical limitations are starting to slow this trend. Quantum computing may offer a path forward, but its practical viability remains uncertain. The reality is that many modern innovations are focused less on solving existential challenges and more on keeping consumers engaged, often through content designed primarily to monetize attention. Ironically, even discussions of societal collapse might be bookended by advertisements. Of course, technology wasn't the only variable adjusted. The researchers also modeled scenarios with higher or lower birth rates, increased recycling efforts, new discoveries of natural resources, and shifts in the scale of global trade. Each variation helped explore a broader picture of how humanity's choices could influence its long-term trajectory. In their simulations, the researchers explored nearly every plausible combination of economic and environmental variables. They focused on 5 key metrics: population, industrial output, food production, natural resources, and pollution. Although each model yielded slightly different projections, a common trend emerged. Most scenarios predicted a sharp global decline beginning around the year 2040. Among the many modeled outcomes, one stood out as the most optimistic: the comprehensive technology scenario. In this version of the future, humanity maintains its current lifestyle, but technological advancement continues at a rapid enough pace to meet the growing demands for food, housing, and energy. Even in this hopeful case, the model anticipates a notable drop in food production, largely driven by pollution in water systems and the degradation of arable land. However, these issues are mitigated through innovation, improved agricultural methods, resource efficiency, and environmental management. Population growth eventually stabilizes around 2040, not because of famine or conflict, but as a natural result of rising wealth and urbanization, which historically tend to correlate with lower birth rates. In the comprehensive technology scenario, industrial output does eventually peak and decline. Ordinarily, this would signal a drop in living standards. However, the model suggests that increased efficiency can offset this decline. For example, the adoption of self-driving vehicles could significantly reduce the need for personal car ownership. Instead of every household owning a vehicle, a smaller fleet of shared autonomous cars could serve many. This would reduce industrial demand, not because society is growing poorer, but because we're using our resources more intelligently. This is the kind of efficiency the World Economic Forum alluded to when it controversially stated, "You will own nothing and be happy." While poorly phrased and widely misunderstood, the core idea reflects a shift from ownership to access enabled by innovation. More efficient use of goods would also reduce pollution and slow the depletion of raw materials. While this outcome might not bring exponential improvements in living standards like those of the last century, it also wouldn't constitute a collapse. Society would continue to function sustainably, albeit with a different structure. For those less confident in breakthrough innovation alone, the researchers proposed an alternative: the stabilized world scenario. In this model, the pace of technological advancement remains steady, but major investments are made in renewable energy, recycling, and efficient infrastructure. It's important to note that this model was developed before climate change became central to public discourse. As such, the focus was on avoiding resource exhaustion and managing local pollution, without factoring in broader environmental concerns like carbon emissions. The stabilized world scenario shares many similarities with the comprehensive technology model. However, its key distinction lies in a voluntary slowdown of industrial output implemented before it triggers major issues like food shortages or environmental degradation. Among all the scenarios modeled by the MIT team, this was considered the most optimistic. That is, unless some unforeseen technological breakthrough completely rewrites the rules of the global economy. Could such a discovery emerge? Possibly. But planning for unknown, hypothetical technologies is a risky strategy, short of offering a symbolic prayer to Daddy Elon. The real concern comes from the 2021 follow-up study led by Gaia Harrington. Her analysis compared the MIT projections to real-world data and found that humanity today is not on track for the stabilized world scenario. In fact, our current trajectory most closely mirrors what the original 1972 report called the business as usual 2 scenario. And that's where the outlook turns grim. This scenario models a global collapse, not through war or sudden catastrophe, but through the slow unraveling of interconnected systems that can no longer support modern civilization. In the business as usual 2 scenario, pollution continues to rise unchecked, while solutions like large-scale recycling never become cost-effective or widely implemented through subsidies. At first glance, there's a surge in industrial output higher than in any other modeled pathway, but that fleeting growth quickly gives way to crisis. Food production begins to falter, leading to plummeting birth rates in wealthy nations and widespread famine in poorer ones. The shrinking base of young workers drags industrial capacity down, which in turn slows the global economy. Meanwhile, easily accessible natural resources grow scarce, compounding the economic decline. Bit by bit, the complex web that sustains modern life begins to unravel. This isn't just a recession, it's a systemic collapse. Earlier in this video, I mentioned I'd rather be a modern middle-class worker than a king from 150 years ago. But if this scenario plays out, we might soon face a world where being a middle-class worker today is preferable to being a king just 20 years from now. That's not a punchline, it's a terrifying possibility. Naturally, any study that forecasts societal collapse is bound to face skepticism. The Limits to Growth report was no exception. Many critics dismissed it outright as alarmist. But here's the unsettling part. Many of those criticisms haven't aged well. In fact, current global data has tracked the business as usual model with disturbing accuracy. Some critics argue that the study underestimates the power of human innovation. They acknowledge that yes, at this moment, our pace of progress might fall short, but necessity, after all, is the mother of invention. When pushed to the edge, humanity has a remarkable track record of rising to the challenge, and signs of that pivot are already visible. Renewable energy technologies are accelerating, becoming more accessible and cost-effective with each passing year. There are still critical gaps, waste management being a major one, but the progress we've seen in just the past decade is undeniable. So, what do I think will happen? Honestly, my opinion shouldn't matter nearly as much as the data. I'd encourage you to explore both the original 1972 Limits to Growth report and the 2021 follow-up analysis. They offer deep insights from some of the world's top economists and scientists, 17 of them in fact, whose forecasts have been reinforced by a new generation of analysts. At best, this may all prove to be overly cautious. If so, we'll have learned valuable lessons about the challenges of building predictive models for complex systems. At worst, well, you might want to start brushing up on how to forage for edible roots in the forest. You can start your survival training today with Skillshare.